how is your niece, General?
The words did not echo. They were delivered with the precise, surgical calculation of a sniper pulling a trigger. They came from a captured SS intelligence officer sitting handcuffed in a wooden chair, staring directly into the eyes of General George S. Patton. The German officer wasn't shouting. He wasn't begging for his life. He was smiling. It was a cold, venomous smirk, born from a deeply arrogant belief that he had just exposed the great American war hero as an absolute fraud. This wasn't an interrogation. This was a high-stakes psychological chess match. The SS officer had just moved his queen, fully expecting the American general to flip the board in a blind, predictable rage. Before we analyze the absolute masterclass in psychological destruction that followed, I need to know who I am talking to. They called this general a lot of things in the press, but if you know the one title he truly earned, the one that made the German high command genuinely sweat, I want you to drop it in the comments right now. Type old blood and guts to lock in. Let's see who the real historians are in this community. If you want the raw, unfiltered truth of the men who shaped our world, hit that subscribe button. We don't do sanitized textbook summaries here. We look at the brutal intellectual warfare that happens when two completely opposed ideologies lock eyes in a closed room. Let us analyze the board. The SS officer sitting across from Patton was not frontline infantry. He was a product of the Sicherheitsdienst, the SD, the intelligence-gathering branch of the SS. He was trained to find the hairline fractures in human psychology and hammer them until the mind shattered. He knew that by the spring of 1945, the physical war for Germany was entirely lost. The Third Reich was collapsing under the weight of Soviet artillery and American armor. For an SS intelligence officer captured alive, survival meant shifting the battlefield from the physical to the psychological. He needed leverage. He needed to prove that the victorious Americans, who were about to put him and his colleagues on trial for crimes against humanity, were just as morally bankrupt as the regime they were defeating. And he knew exactly where Patton's armor was thinnest. History universally presents George S. Patton as an immovable force of iron discipline. He was the commander who demanded perfectly shined boots in a combat zone. He was the warrior who prayed to God for good weather to kill his enemies and believed he was the reincarnated soul of ancient conquerors. But the SS intelligence network had compiled a completely different dossier. They knew about the whispers surrounding Patton's personal life. Specifically, they knew about Jean Gordon. Jean Gordon was Patton's half-niece by marriage. She was vibrant, fiercely intelligent, decades younger than the general, and a constant shadowed presence near the 3rd Army headquarters. Officially, she was a Red Cross worker attached to the American forces. Unofficially, according to the deeply suppressed rumors of his own staff and the later writings of esteemed military historians, she was his forbidden lover. You have to understand the catastrophic stakes of this secret. In 1945, a scandal of this magnitude wouldn't just result in a slap on the wrist. It would mean absolute, immediate professional annihilation. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, was already at his breaking point with Patton. Eisenhower had nearly fired Patton twice over the infamous soldier slapping incidents in Sicily. The press was constantly looking for a reason to tear the controversial general down. Furthermore, Patton's wife, Beatrice, was an incredibly wealthy, powerful woman who aggressively protected her husband's legacy, but was acutely, painfully aware of John's lingering presence. The SS officer knew that if the international press caught wind of this affair, Patton would be stripped of his command, disgraced, and sent home in absolute humiliation. The German officer was weaponizing Patton's deepest personal failing to save his own neck. His smirk was a silent declaration. "I know who you really are. You sit there with your stars judging me for my ideology, but you betray your own wife. You break the moral codes of your own religion. You are a hypocrite, and I hold the key to your destruction." He expected Patton to react like a cornered animal. He anticipated the legendary Patton temper. He wanted the general to scream, to draw his ivory-handled revolvers, to strike him across the face. If Patton lost his temper, the SS officer won. A violent reaction would validate the secret. It would prove the intelligence was accurate and that the threat had successfully crippled the American commander's judgment. Here is where the strategy shifts. If you have ever had someone try to use your personal life or a past mistake to destroy your professional credibility, type tactic in the comments right now. We are looking at the ultimate life-or-death version of that exact scenario. Let us know if you've faced that kind of manipulation. The American guards standing at the door instinctively tightened their grips on their rifles, bracing for the inevitable explosion. The young military interpreter swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously between the two men. But the explosion never came. Patton did not yell. His face did not flush with anger. His hands remained perfectly still on the table. General George S. Patton was a master tactician, and he understood the fundamental rule of psychological warfare. When the enemy expects fire, you drown them in ice. He understood that defending himself, denying the claim, or showing even a fraction of an inch of anger would mean playing exactly into the SS officer's trap. Instead, Patton's eyes went completely dead. He stared at the German officer with the cold, detached curiosity of a biologist examining an insect on a pin. The silence in the room stretched on. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. The tension became physically agonizing. The SS officer's smirk began to falter. The smug certainty in his eyes flickered, replaced by a sudden creeping sense of doubt. He had played his absolute best card, the ultimate leverage, and the American general hadn't even blinked. Patton was refusing to play the game on the Germans' terms. He was suffocating the attack with absolute silence. When Patton finally spoke, his voice was barely above a low, vibrating growl. He bypassed the insult entirely. He didn't mention Gene Gordon's name. He didn't defend his honor. He attacked the core of the SS officer's existence. "You think you are an intelligence officer?" Patton said, his gaze drilling into the man. "You think you possess secrets that grant you power, but you are nothing but a rat trapped in a sinking ship, trying to bite the heel of the man who is about to drown you." This was the pivot. Patton shifted the interrogation from a defense of his personal life to a surgical dissection of the Germans' professional cowardice. Patton did not come to this interrogation unprepared. The Third Army's G2 intelligence section was arguably the most efficient information-gathering machine in the European theater. Patton didn't just know how to command tanks. He knew exactly who he was dealing with before he ever walked into the room. Patton signaled to his aide without breaking eye contact with the prisoner. The aide stepped forward and placed a thick manila folder on the table. It wasn't a file regarding American troop movements. It was a highly detailed dossier on the specific SS officer sitting in the chair. Patton opened the file. He didn't read it with anger. He read it with the bored clinical detachment of a man reading a grocery list. He didn't read out the officer's glorious battles or his ideological commitments to the fatherland. Patton read the intercepted field communications proving that this so-called elite commander had systematically abandoned his own enlisted men during the chaotic retreat across the Rhine River. Patton read the logistics reports, backed by captured German quartermaster documents, proving that this officer had hoarded stolen French wine, medical supplies, and civilian food rations in his personal transport, while his own teenage conscripts were freezing and starving to death in the mud. Patton looked up from the file. The psychological dismantling was complete. The smirk on the SS officer's face was entirely gone, replaced by the pale, sickening realization of his own total exposure. The German had walked into the room thinking he was the predator. Patton had just systematically proven that the man was nothing more than a parasite feeding off his own dying army. I want you to think like a strategist right now. If an enemy tried to blackmail you with a personal secret, would you have the iron discipline to completely ignore the insult and surgically attack their professional failures instead? Type checkmate in the comments if you would hit them back with their own cowardice, or type silence if you would have simply ended the conversation and walked away. Let us know your move on the chessboard. Patton leaned back in his chair. He had the man exactly where he wanted him. He had bypassed the emotional trap and struck directly at the officer's ego, completely invalidating his status as a military professional. "You bring up my family," Patton said, his voice dropping another octave, dripping with pure, unadulterated contempt. You use the names of women and the whispers of gossips because you have absolutely no honor left of your own to stand on. A real soldier, a man who actually believes in his cause, fights to the death alongside his men. He doesn't steal their food and run away. You thought you could sit in that chair and judge me. But you are not a soldier. You are a scavenger, and I do not justify my life to scavengers. Patton closed the folder with a sharp, definitive snap. He didn't order the man to be beaten. He didn't order him to be sent to a firing squad. Physical violence would have been a release. Patton wanted the man to live with the absolute destruction of his own self-worth. Patton stood up and looked at the American guards. He pointed at the SS officer and ordered the guards to strip the man of his insignia. He ordered them to tear the Silver Death's head and the SS lightning bolts from the man's collar. Patton declared, right there in the room, that this man was officially stripped of his military rank. Not by a formal Allied tribunal, not by a court of law, but because General Patton had personally deemed him fundamentally unworthy of being called a military officer in any army on the face of the earth. He was to be processed not as a high-value intelligence asset, but as a common, cowardly criminal. As the guards hauled the stunned, deeply humiliated German out of the room, Patton didn't even bother to watch him leave. The chess match was over. Patton had neutralized the psychological attack, taking the Nazis' smug sense of superiority and turning it into profound, devastating shame. He had defended his secret without ever acknowledging it existed. But the story of George S. Patton and Jean Gordon does not end with a victory in an interrogation room. The reality of history is rarely a clean, triumphant narrative. The aftermath of this secret is a stark, heartbreaking reminder of the deeply human, profoundly tragic cost of the Second World War. The secret of Jean Gordon remained contained for the duration of the conflict, hidden behind the massive, towering shadow of Patton's battlefield triumphs. He continued to drive the Third Army relentlessly across Europe, breaking the back of the German counteroffensive at the Battle of the Bulge, and pushing his armor deep into the heart of the collapsing Reich. He was hailed as a conquering hero, a man who seemed entirely invincible to enemy bullets, artillery shells, and political sabotage. But no man is invincible to fate. In December 1945, just months after the guns finally fell silent in Europe, General Patton was involved in a bizarre, low-speed automobile accident in occupied Germany. His neck was broken. He was completely paralyzed from the neck down. As he lay dying in a military hospital bed in Heidelberg, the political and military establishment went into hyperdrive to manage the optics. His wife Beatrice was immediately flown to his side. Concurrently, the military brass, acutely aware of the delicate and highly explosive situation regarding his personal life, quietly ensured that Jean Gordon, the woman who had shadowed his command across a blood-soaked continent, was kept entirely away from the hospital. Patton died on December 21, 1945. He took the full, unvarnished truth of his personal demons and his deepest secrets to his grave. The aftermath of his death is one of the most heartbreaking, overlooked footnotes in all of military history. Jean Gordon, a brilliant woman who had tied her entire emotional existence, her identity, and her purpose to the larger-than-life aura of George S. Patton, was utterly, completely devastated. The man she loved, the man who had commanded armies and bent the course of human history to his will, was gone. She was entirely alone, surrounded by the crushing grief and the suffocating silence of a secret she could never publicly mourn. Just days after Patton's death, Jean Gordon returned to her apartment in New York City. She closed the heavy doors. She sealed the windows. She turned on the gas oven and she ended her own life. She was only 30 years old. This is the visceral, tragic reality of history that is routinely scrubbed from the neatly packaged documentaries on mainstream television networks. We are conditioned from a young age to view historical figures as statues carved from solid marble, perfect, unyielding, and entirely flawless. We want them to be simple heroes. But statues do not win wars. Flawed, bleeding, fiercely complicated human beings win wars, and human beings are infinitely complex, capable of possessing the highest, most brilliant levels of strategic genius and awe-inspiring battlefield courage, while simultaneously harboring profound moral failures and deeply tragic personal lives. General George S. Patton was a man who demanded absolute, uncompromising perfection from his soldiers. He slapped a shell-shocked GI in a field hospital because he genuinely believed the man was displaying cowardice. He viewed war as a holy endeavor. He believed he was destined by the universe for eternal military glory, yet he was entirely incapable of applying that same ruthless, ironclad discipline to his own heart. When that SS intelligence officer sat in that chair and tried to weaponize Patton's affair, he fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the man sitting across the table. He thought exposing a moral flaw would shatter the legend. But Patton's legend was never built on being a perfect, spotless saint. It was built on being the most dangerous, uncompromising predator in a world that had been engulfed by absolute darkness. Patton knew he was a sinner. He knew he was deeply flawed. But he also knew, with absolute certainty, that it takes a violent, flawed, and terrifyingly focused man to destroy a truly evil regime. As we bring this incredible, untold chapter of history to a close, I want you to leave your final thought in the comments. Does knowing the tragic hidden story of Gene Gordon and the moral complexities of his personal life change how you view General Patton's legacy? Do you see him as a lesser commander, or simply as a more realistic, tragic human being who bore the weight of his own brilliance? Type the word complex in the comments if you believe that understanding true history means accepting the dark shadows alongside the brilliant light. We read every single comment, and this is a historical conversation that challenges everything we think we know about leadership. Thank you for joining us today on WW2 Rebound as we dig past the sterilized propaganda and the polished myths to find the raw, beating heart of history. These are the stories of triumph, psychological warfare, tragedy, and the brutal reality of the human condition. If you want to keep exploring the intense, unfiltered truths of the men and women who lived through the world's greatest conflicts, please make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications right now. Your support is the only reason we can keep breaking down these incredible historical walls and bringing these legends back to life. We have many more intense, deeply human stories from the shadows of history currently in production, and we don't want you to miss a single second of the intellectual warfare. Stay curious, stay objective, and always remember that history is a chess match where the most dangerous moves are the ones you never see coming. We will see you in the next video. Stay strong.